Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Last Honest Realtor podcast. I am your host, David Fleming. Thank you so much for joining me today in what is our very first podcast back in the new year. How long are you allowed to wish somebody a Happy New Year? I think February 1st is going to be the cutoff. But Happy New Year to you. I hope you had a fantastic holiday break and that your New Year is off to a wonderful start. Now, the spring market, it's funny, I said spring, we're in the dead of winter. The spring market essentially goes from January through June, which ironically includes winter, spring, and a little bit of summer. But the spring market is almost upon us. Call it the winter market if you want. Call it the New Year's market. It is January. It is very slow. It takes a while for the market to round back into form. So what I wanted to do today in the first podcast back is predictions. They're not actually going to be predictions. They're discussion points. But man, do people like searching the word predictions. So what I usually do is try to discuss. And by that, I mean, we can all throw predictions out there, but at the end of the day, most of the people doing it have absolutely no idea whether that prediction is going to come true or not. So what I want to do today is I want to go through predictions and discussion points and questions. On Toronto Realty blog, I refer to it as What's on My Real Estate Mind. I did a 3-part blog series on that. I run this feature every January. And while I'm not one for predictions, in my 2022 version of this on Toronto Realty blog, my very first burning question, if you will, was how much further can this market possibly push us? Now, I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but remember 2022, our peak came in February. This is what I wrote. I said, push us? Yes, push us. How much further can this market go, run, increase, rise, and push? But also, how much more can it push us to take on debt, accept the rate of appreciation, and make personal and financial sacrifices to remain home-owning Torontonians? I really don't like the feeling of an out-of-control market being good for me, because I discuss sort of how people are always saying, oh, the market must be great for you right now because it's a runaway. You know, listen, I work in a balanced market, a cold market, a hot market. But point being by then, as I said, as a byproduct, I understand this thinking, but the raison d'etre, the French people are saying you pronounce that wrong, is not a market that's spiraling into chaos. Now, I wrote that in January of 2022, and it proved very apt because, of course, we saw the market go up. I think it was month over month was like 7%, and then another 7%. It was wild, and then the market came crashing down. So not trying to use hindsight as a tire pump, but it certainly felt like some of us were watching what was happening in the market and wondering, can this continue? So continuing is one thing, but continuing at that pace was another thing entirely. So all this is to say that this feature is not so much about predictions as it is about discussions. We like to discuss hot topics, burning questions, trends, issues, and blind spots, and all this will help us remain alert and attentive to what's important in the real estate market and associated industries. So having said that, the first prediction or discussion point is about market trajectory. Now, tell me that this is simply renaming price because most people are talking about prices, but I'll tell you why I think it's different. The price of real estate is often the most important topic or the one that concerns people the most. But whereas in other years we talked about price thresholds, previous pricing peaks, and this sort of return to those peaks, this year I'm concerned with the overall trajectory of the market. So let me read into this further. Last year, I was convinced the average home price would increase. The conversation was then about when and how much. This year, I'm asking a question about the trajectory of the market, specifically, will it go up or down? And that's really the discussion point. So in previous years, what we did was we looked at the market peak in February of 2022, and we said, when is the average home price going to return to this magical threshold of 1,354,554? Now, in another year, I remember picking 1.2 million, for example, 2023, 2024, and 2025, kept saying, when are we going to top the $1.2 million threshold? Sort of picking a random arbitrary number. Now, in this space last year, in January, this is what I said. Well, I said it in question form. Tell me that the 416 average home price will be the same in April or May of 2025 as it was in the summer or fall of 2024. Go ahead. Does anyone want to tell me this? Or can I connect the dots for us? Reducing the Bank of Canada lending rate from 5% to 2.5% to 3% is going to push real estate prices up. I was wrong. Plain and simple. There's no better way to explain that. But at the risk of acting like, that guy in your fantasy football pool that doesn't make the playoffs and then every week tells you what would have happened had he made the playoffs because his non-playoff roster is so good, I want to remind everyone what happened when 2025 began. bear with me here because we're going to use the T word. First, consider that the average home price in January of 2025 was $1,049,994. Now, why is this important? It's important because the average home price the previous January was $1,026,703. So that's a 1.4% increase month over month in January. Now, what happened in February of 2025? Donald Trump. Tariffs, tariffs, tariffs. That's all we heard throughout January, and it got louder in February. Now, February 13th, 2025, President Trump announced his reciprocal tariffs, and as if that wasn't bad enough, he basically held the world and Canada hostage when he announced that they would take effect on April 2nd, which he named Liberation Day. So working in the real estate market the first 4 months of 2025, I can tell you that nonstop, all we did was talk about April 2nd. April 2nd, every single day. This drove me nuts. Now, I mentioned the average home price in the GTA increased January over January. What happened in February? Well, it declined 2.2% year over year. Now, that gap widened in March when we saw a 2.5% decline, and this continued throughout the spring market into the summer and through the fall. In fact, the only month, you ready for this? The only month in 2025 where you compare to 2024 in that month where we saw an increase was in January. Trump took office, tariffs, economy, and that completely changed the trajectory of the market. So I'm not saying this, as I mentioned, to sort of undo my prediction that, the average home price is going to go up. It went up in Jan. And then if you look at the monthly, year over year, if you will, down 2.2, down 2.5, down 4.2, down 3.8. Into June, down 5.2, down 5 in July, down 4.9 in August, down 4.3 in September. And then in October, we're down 7.1 year over year. November 6.0, and we finished December down 5.1 year over year. So that figure is hot off the press. December, 1,006,000. And why this is important is because that is the lowest monthly average price since January of 2021. That to me is the Trump effect. Now, does it sound like I'm blaming Trump for the results of the 2025 real estate market? I certainly hope not, because it wasn't my intention, but I'm making a point about market trajectory. He took office in February, and I'm loath to admit this talk of tariffs absolutely paralyzed the real estate buyer pool and changed that trajectory. So I want to draw a parallel. Now think back to 2020 for a moment. And some of you aren't going to like this parallel, but I think it's apt. We first heard about this crazy virus overseas. Then we heard about this single case of it in Canada. We eventually became obsessed with this, and it was like this slow creep as it began to take over our lives. And eventually these rumors, discussions, and fears became reality, and we all know what happened next. We panicked. We stopped dead in our tracks. We completely froze. But then we learned, we accepted, and above all, we adapted. We wore masks, right? We ran around Purell, but we figured it out. We didn't sit at home anymore. That was our new reality. And we learned to live within it. Now, I believe the same patterns took place in 2025 with respect to Donald Trump, his threats, policies, tariffs, and the new economic reality. In a word, both our lives during the pandemic and our lives in the new economic reality became normalized. Now, I'm not saying that our real estate market is going to take off the way that it did in 2020 after it became normalized, but I'm suggesting rather that it would be prudent to consider what happens after a market shock. Now, case in point, the average Treb home price when the pandemic hit, in February of 2020, it was about $910,000. The stay-at-home order came in March 16th, because I remember the night before, I had 14 offers on a condo in Regent Park. $499 we sold for $620. The day before the stay-at-home order. Then the average home price dropped 9% in a single month, April of 2020. But if you were to plot this on a graph, which I did on my blog, you can see that 1 month drop-off. Here we are 4.5, 5, 6, 6 years later? It's barely even a blip. It doesn't register. Now, to flesh out this thought, do you remember what happened in April after Donald Trump's Liberation Day? The stock market crashed. The Dow Jones went from 42,225 on April 2nd to 37,645 on April 8th. It fell 10.8%. So during COVID, the average home price in Toronto dropped 9% month over month as soon as the shock happened. And the Dow Jones dropped 10.8% in a week when Donald Trump essentially tanked the market. As it stands, while we film this, the Dow is now approaching 50,000. So my comparison, folks, is this. when you have a market shock, whether it was COVID in 2020, and we know that it has rebounded and has since fallen off, whether it is what Donald Trump did to the stock market in April of 2025, or whether it was what effectively Trump, the tariffs, the talk, the paralyzation of our market did in 2025, I think we have to consider that when we look at the overall market trajectory. So you want a prediction from me? Here goes. The average home price by the end of 2026 in Toronto will be higher than 2025. Now let's move on to number 2, sales volume. This is an oldie but a goodie. And if we want to talk about the most important subjects in the real estate market in 2026, we just talked about market trajectory, but dare I say that sales will be at the very top. Now, sales volume has been on my mind for years, and I've probably written about this and done podcasts about this more than anything else in any other topic. Now, what's a bigger story? Substantially fewer people are buying real estate, or the price of real estate has declined? I mean, to quote Seinfeld, I don't know, George, but I think option A strikes my fancy. Now, this is probably the third year in a row that I've made a fuss about sales volume, but it's for good reason. Because the number one reason for the surge in real estate prices in 2020 to 2022 was likely lower interest rates. But I think the sheer number of people buying real estate is just as good a reason. Now, that probably traces back to the pandemic. People in condos didn't want to be in condos, they want to be in houses. People in houses, well, they wanted to be in condos. People in the city, they wanted to move out of it, and people out of the city wanted to move back into it. History will show there's a reason we saw over 122,000 sales in 2020. Now, you might argue that perhaps the sheer number of people buying real estate is a byproduct of the lower interest rates, but not necessarily, because as we saw in 2025, when the Bank of Canada cut the lending rate from 5% to 2.5%, sales remained stagnant. So others will argue that FOMO, fear of missing out, took over 2020 to 2022, and that's another reason why we saw so many sales. I would ask, are we that pathetic as a species? Do we really only do things because other people are doing it? And then I think, wait, don't answer that, because up until now, I was kind of having a pretty good day. So throughout 2025, we tracked the cumulative sales throughout podcasts, Toronto Realty blog posts, looking to extrapolate the data and come up with what we think will be the eventual number. I have that number now because we are into January and the TREB stats have been published. Folks, we had 122,000 properties trade hands in 2021. Now that fell dramatically to 2022 after we hit peak pricing. The Bank of Canada increased rates, CMHC forced buyers to the sidelines, and of course, we had the federal government talking about cooling the housing market. Now, sales dropped to 66,000 and change in 2023. They went up slightly to just below 68,000 in 2024. And then in 2025, I started this real estate prediction game on Toronto Realty blog. One of the questions I had was, how many sales will we see in 2025? Now, coming off of 68,000 in 2024, the average prediction from 32 contestants in my game was 72,613. The highest was 83,312. The lowest was some joker at 42,000. But I did have two people predict 60, and they weren't too far off. But ironically, the 72,000 that was predicted was 10,000 higher than what we actually saw, because we saw 62,433 sales in 2025, which is the lowest this millennium. It is absolutely wild. Now, as we noted previously, the average sale price in the GTA increased January 2025 over January 2024, but surprisingly, this didn't increase the number of sales. Because while January we saw a year-over-year increase in price, sales were down 8.9% overall. Now, this trend continued. And again, I love comparing data sets. So let's look month by month, comparing 2024 to 2025. January, we're down 8.9%. February, we're down 28% in sales. That is Trump and tariffs. March, we're down 23.6%. April, we're down 21%. That is when things started to become normalized. Liberation Day, April 2nd. All of a sudden in May, sales are only down 11%. In June of 2025, sales were up 0.5% year over year. Sales were up year over year in July, 13%, August, 4%, September, 11%. Now, sales were down year over year in October, November, and December, but the point is made. Again, you look at the market shock, and I believe that is what happened last year, and that is why I believe, to be perfectly honest, that sales have the potential this year to hit upwards of, you ready for this? 80,000. Now, listen, I could have said 70, and I would have been right. I mean, that's fine. You're going to predict 70,000 sales. Wow. So 2 years ago, there was 68,000 and you're going out on a limb. No, that's an easy prediction to make. When you look at, and I'm staring at this list of sales, 122,000 in 2021. Do you know what the bottom of this list is? The bottom 5 years, 2022, 2002, which was like a quarter century ago when the city was half the size, 2024, 2023, and 2025. Think about that again. 2022, 2002, 2024, 2023, 2025. 4 of the last 5 on this list are the 4 last years that we experienced. I believe we have hit the trough. Now, I did something really neat, or at least I think it was. I plotted TREB sales from 2002 onwards, and here's what I noticed. We know we had a market decline in 08. 08, we had a low of sales. I can't show you this graph. Well, I could. You're watching on YouTube, but if you're listening wherever you get your podcasts, you probably won't be able to understand what I'm talking about. Now, we know we had a drop in 17. But the valley on this chart for sales is 18. And then we know we had a drop in 2022, and the valley for sales is 2025. So what I have seen with these different market shocks, 08, 17, and 22, is that as time goes on, this shock takes longer to be absorbed by the market. So again, I'm going to repeat that. We had a shock to the market in 08, and the valley for sales was 08 because it popped back up in 09 and so forth. We had a shock to the market in 17. Prices dropped. Market changed. But sales were lower in 18. And then we had a shock to the market in 2022 with the Bank of Canada increasing rates, coming off an all-time peak. And here we are with the lowest sales in 2025. So I don't have a scientific answer for what this is and why it happened, but I do believe this allows me to say that, yeah, I think that we've hit the trough as far as sales go. Sales will not be lower. People love predictions, right? Here you go. Sales will not be lower than 62,433. And then he predicted sales would not be lower than the all-time lowest. Yeah, I don't think I'm going out on a limb, but I do think we're going to see upwards of 80,000 sales this year. That was Leonardo DiCaprio in The Wolf of Wall Street. Upwards of $60,000 in his New Jersey accent. All right. My third point, my third question, my third prediction involves the pre-construction condominium market. I'm old. I don't know where I was going with that. 2007, folks, that's when I started my blog. The very first time I ever wrote about pre-construction condos, July 16th, 2007, I wrote a blog post titled Nicholson 1-bedroom, Hoffman 2-bedroom plus den, or DiCaprio penthouse. It's funny, I just mentioned him. So what I was talking about was Festival Tower, a pre-construction project where they named all the units after celebrities. And I thought to myself, well, people aren't that dumb. They're not going to go buy a condo because, it's like the Kevin Bacon model or something like that. It's funny, I always say Kevin Bacon. I think I put him in here. So this is what I wrote on my blog in 2007. Keep in mind, I was 27. I just started it. And my humor was a bit different. I said, my opinion, humble as always. If you're one of Toronto's social elite and you want your other socially elite friends to marvel at your new, modest, $1 million penthouse, then this building is for you. If you are a seemingly normal person without a yacht, cottage, alligator shoes, and a desire to perhaps, possibly, maybe, one day, bump into Kevin Bacon in the lobby of your building, then your money is much better suited elsewhere. Why do I always think Kevin Bacon? If I had to choose between the Susan Sarandon suite for $900,000 all in versus 3 above average Toronto condos at $300,000. That's how long ago this was. A 4-bedroom house in Leaside, a mansion in Oakville, or 2 semi-detached houses in Riverdale, I can tell you there would be a 0% chance my mail will be sent to a suite named after the star of movies like Lorenzo's Oil. I assume Kevin Bacon was in that. Or maybe, Susan Sarandon, that's correct. So it's funny because that blog post was 798 words, and now that's like my folksy intro as it's described. So listen, that was the first time I ever wrote about pre-construction. That was 2007. That was 19 years ago. There are people that are that old that can drink and vote. So folks, suffice it to say, like my real estate kryptonite has always been this pre-construction thing. And I don't want to compare myself to Michael Burry from The Big Short, but I've been predicting this since then. So if you're familiar with the analogy, where there's smoke, there's fire. The smoke finally gave way, and this entire pre-construction industry went up in a spectacular blaze for all to see. We discussed pre-construction condos throughout 2025, but I have absolutely no doubt that the conversation has just started, and this is going to be a massive topic in 2026. So before we get to that, I have to make a confession. And here's where this Michael Burry comparison, people are Googling Michael Burry. I have to make this confession. As it pertains to the pre-construction condominium industry or the discussion of pre-construction condos, I have felt every single emotion there is to feel over the years, but there is one that I have not felt, or at least had not felt until lately. Jealousy. Simply put, I am jealous. I am jealous of all the writers, columnists, pundits, economists, mortgage brokers, and real estate agents, don't even get me started, who are now coming out and saying what I have been saying since 2007 about the pre-construction condo market. Case in point, the Toronto Star sends a newsletter every month called Living Here. And in December, this was their excerpt. Ready? Historians looking back at Toronto's ill-fated condo market may point to one warning signal: the whole industry was going to come tumbling down. The gap in prices between pre-construction condos and newly built ones. During the pandemic, at the height of cheap money, investors piled into the pre-con market, pushing prices 40% above that of newly completed units. 40%. Now, we're looking back in shock and awe. December of 2025, they put 40% with an exclamation mark. All of these neighborhood geniuses are coming out of the woodwork with the benefit of hindsight, but where were these people when folks were literally sleeping in the streets to be first in line at the VVVV VIP sale? Nowhere. I mean, I don't know. These they were probably in high school. Sorry, I needed to get that off my chest. You can clearly tell that this is on my mind as we get into 2026, and not just because of my own personal demons, but because the story is only just ramping up. And I have been saying this for over 15 years. The Michael Burry comparison was that he saw what was happening with mortgage-backed securities, and absolutely nobody listened. But folks like me and Ben Rabideau have been talking about this, well, you saw, '07. So I did a quick Google search for new condos in Toronto. What comes up in my news feed? Here are the headlines. Toronto condo market, only 25 units sold in October. The Toronto condo isn't dead, but it's going to be different. Why this Toronto condo? Selling at a $300,000 loss. I can tell you why. Toronto condo market, just 28 new units sold in September. These are the headlines. So you think anything's going to change in 2026? How about we present some statistics to underscore exactly where we stand right now? Listen to this, guys. Only 2,540 new condo units broke ground from January through December in 2025. It's the lowest number since 1998. Here's another one. In the first 10 months of 2025, only 714 new condos were sold in Toronto. That's down 86% from 2023, only 2 years prior. In 2025's Q1, only 45% of pre-construction units in Toronto had secured buyers, which is down from 85% in 2023 and down from 94% in 2022. And we know that condos have to be 70% sold to break ground, so this is a problem. That was a building falling over. Okay, metaphorically, of course. Year to date, this is the next stat, year to date, 18 condo buildings with over 4,000 units have been canceled, and 20 projects with over 4,000 units are in receivership. I'm laughing. Or on hold with a high likelihood of cancellation. The reason I'm laughing, would you pay $30 for a $20 bill? I mean, that's what pre-construction was. And that's what I was saying since 2007. So I could go on, but I think you get the point. For as long as we've worked in a market where condos have been sold before they've been built, we've never seen a market this poor. Now, I hesitate to even suggest that we're in a market because despite 714 new condos being sold in the first 10 months of 2025, I don't expect any of those buildings to break ground. So as we look ahead to 2026, I have three very important, seemingly rhetorical questions about the pre-construction condo market in Toronto. Number one, when does it make financial sense for builders to build again? Number two, how will the sales model work in the future? This is crucial. And number three, Who is ever going to line up to buy a pre-construction condo again, having witnessed what just happened? You're a kid. You touch the stove. You burn your finger. Will you do it again? And if so, how long will you wait? This here, this is destined to be a kid that goes, ow, ow. You get it, right? Who's going to go and buy a pre-construction condo in the future under the same system? So, an article you need to read in case you haven't already. It was in the Toronto Star, November 28th, 2025. It's called "The Toronto Condo Isn't Dead, but It's Going to Be Different." It was very lengthy. I think this is where that quote came from that really bothered me, where they were talking about, 40% more. And I've been saying that for 20 years, fine. It's one of the best articles I've read on pre-con in 2025, but they dug deep to provide market statistics that I said you can't find anywhere else, and it defines the problem. They put together this incredible chart. It shows how costs and revenues compare for a 500 square foot one bedroom condo in 2024 versus 2014. So it costs in 2014 $291,000 to build. 10 years later in 2024, it costs $609,000. Guys, that's the problem. So, you know the people, communists, sorry, I don't know where I was going with that. You know the people that like, they're downtown and they're like spray painting, like, developer greed, etc. $609,000 it cost to build this condo. 10 years ago, it was $291,000. Is that the developer greed? Well, I mean, the municipal fees have gone up 238%. Oh boy, I've only been talking about that for 10 years. Let's see. Soft costs have gone up 110%. Financing costs have gone up 200%. Construction costs have gone up 90%. Land acquisition's gone up 57%. So the point is, developers cannot build condos in 2025. They can't. I mean, again, communist, I suppose they could build at a massive loss and they could just put themselves out of business because a large portion of society believes that that's what should happen. But for people that have, like a high school education or better, I think you would recognize that developers don't build at catastrophic losses. Okay, I was shooting myself in the foot. I don't know if that was conveyed. So this graphic above shows that it costs in 2024 $1,218 per square foot to build. That's break even, man. Okay, pricing at $675,000, which is $1,350 a square foot, nets the developer $9,584 in profit. Is the developer going to do that? No, they're not. In fact, I would argue that this unit would need to sell for $775,000, which is $1,550 per square foot, so the developer can go ahead and make enough money to stay in business. But who is going to line up to pay $1,550 a foot right now? Nobody. Who should have paid this last year, the year before that, and the year before that? Nobody. Because as the article in the Star told us, there should have never been a gap between pre-construction prices and resale. God, who's been saying that since 2007? I did that video, I've probably talked about a million times. I had a cake in one hand. I actually went and bought it. And I had cake mix in the other. Why would you pay more for the cake mix than the cake? The cake's already made. And I use this because sometimes to prove a point, you need an analogy. And you dumb down the analogy so people are like, absolutely, I get it. A cake is $5, the cake mix is $1. Go home, make the cake. Take the time to do it. Take the risk that you're going to, burn it, drop it on the floor. But if you're going to pay $10 for cake mix and $5 for the darn cake, it makes no sense. And that is what happened in pre-con. So the answer to my first question, when does it make sense for developers to build again? Never. Not now. Not 2026, not 2027. And of course, the irony is, this is so funny. It's going to cause a massive deficit in condos in 2029 and beyond. But how are new condo sales going to work in the future? Feels like a trick question. Okay, I have two answers for you. One, the same way as before. Two, a different way. But both have problems because we can't sell condos the same way as before since that caused a house of cards to come crashing down. But we can't expect to find a magical new way so long as the banks want to remain profitable without catastrophic risk. The only way I can think of, hear that? Gulp. Is for the CMHC to backstop the entire pre-construction condominium industry, which is an idea that rattles me to my core because the Canadian taxpayer should not be backstopping this. And yet it's one that I think has a non-zero chance of taking place because you have, Mark Carney, the Prime Minister dad with his little, shirt tuck collar coming out of his little cardigan. Yeah, Mark Carney. So this guy's decided that he's going to build houses. And it's like, I don't know, I think the number for his prefab homes is like $1.3 million to build a house. That's going to solve the housing crisis. So how about this? Why doesn't the CMHC just backstop all of the banks who are backstopping the developers in this ridiculous house of cards situation? I'm not actually suggesting that. I'm being extremely sarcastic. So last but not least, answer me this, okay? I want you to picture this if you're a visual thinker. It's 2009. It's 1 year after the financial crisis in the United States, when subprime mortgages, packeted as marketable securities, essentially proved to be fraudulent. Who walks into their financial advisor's office? I mean, you don't do that anymore. It's all virtual. Who calls their financial advisor? Or in '09, who walks in and says, hello there, I'd like to get some information on investing in mortgage-backed securities. Nobody did that. The entire thing, mortgage-backed securities, we know what happened. You watch The Big Short. Nobody in '09 decided that they're going to go invest in that. So who in the world in 2027 or 8 or 9 is going to walk into a sales center with the same BS that we saw for 15 years after the house of cards fell down? Who's going to go in there and buy that condo in that way? Sadly, I think people will, because people don't change. My fourth point is about the resale condo market. Now, I literally just sang my heart out about the pre-construction market in the previous point, but the resale condominium market has a far greater importance in 2026 than the pre-construction condo market. I mean, which has a greater importance if we're looking 4 to 5 years down the road? Pre-construction for sure, because it's going to lead to this massive deficit. But that is a different story. As I argued through 2025, people need to distinguish between the resale market and pre-construction market when talking about the condo market in general. We now must analyze how these market segments are linked. Now think of condominiums as a basic product, if you would, in an economics class called widgets or units, whatever strikes your fancy. Several years ago, there were not enough units to satisfy demand. That means prices increase. Last year, there were far more units than there were for buyers for them. That means prices decrease. This is somewhat basic, right? But as the year moved along, the number of units increased, whereas the number of buyers, from what we can tell because there's no measure of this, decreased significantly. Now, theoretically, this should put a massive downward pressure on prices. But did it? So here's a hot take. And if there's one hot take in this entire podcast you have to absorb, it's this. Are you ready? This is going to sound like BS, sound like sales nonsense. Get ready to comment. The decline in the condo market in Toronto is not nearly as bad as people are making it out to be. Before you comment BS, listen to this and then comment. If we were to look at the average price in 2022 for detached, semi-detached, and condo, let's go from February of 2022. February of 2022, that was the peak of the market. You ready for this? This is using November's data, which was the most recent I had when I wrote this. The average 416 detached home is down 25.5%. The average 416 townhouse is down 23.1%. The average 416 semi is down 20.8%. And the average 416 condo is only down 14.7%. If I close my eyes, I can see Samuel L. Jackson in Pulp Fiction saying, "Say what again?" Guys, I just said to you, the decline in the condo market isn't nearly as bad as people are making it out to be. And all the haters are going to start commenting. These are called statistics. This is not opinion, this is fact. February 2022's average price versus November of 2025. Condos are down 14.7%. Detached is down 25.7%. Condos are down about half of what detached are. On paper, you can make numbers say anything you want. But the point is made. The decline in resale condo prices isn't nearly as bad as people think it is. And if you want to go one step further, pardon me, I looked at the dates January of 2012 through November of 2025. 416 detached is up 107.8%. 416 condo is up 104%. Guys, it's a wash. that's a 13-year period. Detached is up 107.8 and condo is up 104. This decline is not nearly as bad as the media has made it out to be, as real estate agents have made it out to be. Now, there's always exceptions to the rule. And just to show you that I'm not biased, I want to talk about a condo that I had my eye on. I should have bought this. I pitched it to a couple investors. It's a condo in Tecumseh. I think it was 778 King. I can't remember. It was listed for $440,000, for which the identical model sold in Feb 2022, which was the peak, for $680,000. It's on the market for 35.3% less than it was in 2022. But on paper, we saw the decline was 14.7%. So again, you can make numbers say anything you want. Guys, the point is that there are condos that have gone down more than 14.7% since the peak, and there are condos that have gone down less. But if we're going by the letter of the law and trusting the statistics, it tells us that the real estate condo market has held in exceptionally well on paper since the peak. Now, at the start of every quarter, I run this feature on Toronto Realty blog called How's the Toronto Condo Market? I'll do that in a few weeks' time. But I took a look at this just going up to November. And what I saw in 2025, when you start in January, we saw about 3,000 condo listings, which was 33% higher than the previous high, which was January of 2024. And it was way ahead of 2021, 2022, and so on. But by the end of the year, the new listings in November was below 2021, 2023, and 2024. It was only ahead of 2022. So this idea that the condo prices have dropped, we just talked about that, down 14.7% on paper since the peak compared to detached, which is down 25.5. This idea that everything's for sale. In January of 2025 it was, but by the end of the year, the listings were down. So none of this data screams condo market in nosedive. We're talking 14.7%. So listen, prediction, it's extremely unlikely that the 416 condo price rallies in 2026, but there's a non-zero chance. And at the same time, I think it's unlikely that we'll see the wicked decline that many people are predicting. So if I'm going to make a prediction, I would say that the average condo price will end up plus or minus 2.5% by year's end. 2.5%, as far as I'm concerned, is a wash. So the next thing I want to talk about, real estate prices across Canada. A prediction for you. On the heels of a 2025 where Ontario got absolutely hammered, we're going to see a lot of people leave this province. That's my prediction, and that's the sixth point I'm going to talk about. Now, last year, I wrote a blog post, October 27, 2025, called Canadian Real Estate Landscape, a Year-Over-Year Look. What I did in this blog post was compare the CREA Home Price Index, the HPI, from September of 2025 back to September of 2024. Here are a few of those takeaways. 6 provinces, Newfoundland and Labrador, Quebec, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia and PEI were up year over year. Really? Isn't the real estate market terrible? I thought it was doom and gloom. Didn't we just talk about the economy? 3 provinces, Alberta, British Columbia, and Ontario, were down. I mean, if those aren't the 3 economic engines of the country, I don't know what is. Now, Ontario was down the most at 6.7%. Atlantic Canada and Quebec were soaring. And of the 29 cities in Ontario that the Home Price Index tracks, 23 of them were down year over year. I encourage everyone to read that entire blog post. But the results of this exercise were beyond what I would call interesting. Seeing as I knew nothing about the year-over-year prices coming in this exercise, the results were, without exaggeration, absolutely shocking. Now, if you want to look at Ontario for just a moment, as I mentioned, there were areas that did increase. Bancroft, up 8.4%. Sault Ste. Marie, up 4.6%. Sudbury, up 4.5%. Rideau, St. Lawrence, up 3.8%. North Bay, up 3.7%. A lot of them were down, 1%, 2%, 3%, but I'm going to work backwards from here. And again, this is September to September. Hamilton, Burlington down 9.4%. Hamilton, Burlington down 9.4%. Mississauga down 8.9%. London down 8%. Kitchener-Waterloo down 7.6%. Oakville down 6.8%. GTA, for what it's worth, down 5.5%. It's a sea of reg figures. Now, compare and contrast this with Quebec. The 5 areas that the Home Price Index tracks. Montreal up 6.5%. Santé du Québec, what is that, center of Quebec? Okay. 11.1% increase. Mauricie, that sounded Italian, up 12.4%. Estrie, CMA, I got to stop doing that, up 13.4%. And Quebec, that was very English, Quebec, CMA, Central Metropolitan Area, up 17.4% year over year. So, of course, it's all relative, right? What was happening in these areas 5 years ago. But I think it's fair to say that adjustments have been made for real estate prices in Ontario. But relatively speaking, there are major cities across the country that have extremely attractive real estate prices. So what I did on my blog, just for fun, I went and found this house. And it was on a 50-foot lot. It's a one-story, it's a bungalow. It's a modular home. So you might look at it and say, that looks like a trailer. But it's not. It's a freaking house. It's 3 beds, 2 baths, and 1,400 square feet with a detached garage. How much is this house? Okay, you want to know where it's located? Fine. It's in Moncton. How much is that house? $229,000. That's the list price. Maybe you pull that for $200,000. I mean, in Toronto, that's in your couch cushions, is it not? So tell me you don't want to live in that house, or that you don't want to live in Moncton, or tell me that you don't want to live in that house in Moncton, and that's fine. But where are you getting homes for $229,000 in the GTA? Where are you getting homes for $229,000 across the country? There are areas in Ontario we can find cheaper homes, no doubt about it. Moncton isn't the only place to live, but I'm using this as an example to highlight the fact that not everybody needs to live in Toronto or Vancouver. Now, how much cheaper is real estate in other cities? This was fun. Using the home price index and comparing to the GTA, which is a home price index of 951,700. Montreal is 40% cheaper. Calgary's 42% cheaper. Halifax is 42% cheaper. Saskatoon is 56% cheaper. Edmonton's 51% cheaper. 57% cheaper. Moncton is 60% cheaper. Winnipeg is 60% cheaper. And Quebec City is 65% cheaper. And that's just Toronto. So I know you don't want to live in Quebec City and you can't even speak French, and that's fine. But what about everybody else? Surely there are folks that'll consider moving to Edmonton, where the home price index is 57% lower than it is here in Toronto. As we move into 2026 and beyond, I cannot get this thought out of my mind. We need to keep a focused eye on the home prices across the rest of the country, if for no better reason than to put our own home prices here in Ontario in perspective. And maybe this is an Ontario-wide conversation. If you look at the home price index in Ontario, which is 757,400, versus the other province, British Columbia is 19% higher. But Quebec, there's a 30% discount. 34% in Alberta, 44% in Nova Scotia, 47% in PEI, 52% in Saskatchewan, 56% in Newfoundland and Labrador, and 56% in New Brunswick. And that's not Toronto, that's province versus province. So case in point, I'd be remiss if I did not specifically point this out. Despite the year-over-year HPI increasing across the board in provinces not named Ontario and in BC, and prices in 23 of 29 cities in Ontario decreasing, it is still 2 or 3 times as expensive in Toronto on average. So what I'm saying there is that we have the benefit of this year where the rest of the country caught up because Ontario plummeted and Quebec skyrocketed. So you go back and run this exercise in 2023, it's infinitely more expensive. That is absolutely crazy because we've caught up to it costing a third as much to live in other places across the country. So if we were running this exercise in January of 2025, I think the 40% figures would be 50%. I think the 50% figures would be 60%, and so on. This is something to keep an eye on. And as for predictions, I can't predict what's going to happen with the prices, but I can predict somebody you know is going to leave the province. Somebody you know is going to talk about leaving the province. And you know what? It's going to happen more and more, not just this year, but into next year as well. So this brings me to my last point, guys. Net migration in the province of Ontario. Another prediction, if you will, is that the net migration is going to continue to be negative. Now, this is more economics related than it is real estate related, but surely you see the tie-in. So I guess here, let's do this. Let's ask, why are we discussing this in the first place? So let me follow that question with a question. Would you rather see prices in Ontario decrease or prices in Ontario increase? There's no option C. You're not allowed to say stay balanced. And the reason I ask this is because this depends on whether you own a home or not. And I'm sure there are exceptions to the rule. I'm sure your friend Agnes, she owns her home, but she'd love to see prices fall to benefit the next generation. That's because Agnes bought her house in 1977 for $41,000 and it's worth $3 million. So she doesn't care if it drops to 2.9. But my point is, guys, on the whole, people that don't own real estate want to own real estate and would like to see prices lower. And people that do own real estate would rather see prices higher if there is no option for them to remain flat. So why are we discussing this? Because if Ontario becomes too unaffordable and people move out of the province or never move here in the first place, the entire province suffers in the long term. If the Ontario economy suffers, the irony is real estate prices would decline as a result. Now, it's not quite a catch-22, but it's a bit of a three-bear situation where you're trying to find the porridge with a temperature that is just right. Because since the pandemic, the net migration in Ontario has been negative. Now, the most recent data that I can find for net migration only includes Q1 of 2025. But essentially on this chart that I'm looking at that you can't see, from 2025 all the way through 2021, net migration was very positive. Since then, net migration is negative. Now, negative 5,237 people in Q1 of 2025. You might say, who cares about 5,237 people? But that's not the point. The point is it's about the trend. It's about the trend that net migration was always up in Ontario and now it's always down. Now, what is the mass exodus a function of? I would say home prices, the cost of goods, and unemployment, just to name a few. Now, as I was reporting all throughout 2026, unemployment in Ontario remains higher than the nation's average. Now, using unemployment data from October, because that's the most recent data I have when I wrote this, if you look at October, the Canadian average was 6.9%, but unemployment in Ontario was 7.6%. And if you further break it down by province, Newfoundland's unemployment is 10.1%, Prince Edward Island 8.5%, New Brunswick 7.9%, Alberta 7.8%, Ontario 7.6%, Nova Scotia 6.7%, BC 6.6%, Manitoba 5.8%, Saskatchewan 5.5%, Quebec 5.3%, Yukon 4.9%, Northwest Territories 4.3%. So in case you're wondering, no, today is not the day to talk about why the federal government is responsible for the high unemployment rate in Alberta as they continue to kill Canada's golden goose, aka our oil and gas industry. Oh, someone just turned that off. Someone just clicked stop, and someone went to the comments to talk about, my political beliefs. But we're not going to talk about that today. The point is, all due respect to Newfoundland and Prince Edward Island, but I don't think we can or would want to compare unemployment rates between those two quaint hamlets and a province that houses almost 40% of the nation, which is Ontario. This is supposed to be the country's economic engine. So strip out Newfoundland, PEI, and New Brunswick. You have a 7.8% unemployment rate in Alberta, which of course has been hammered by us obliterating our oil and gas industry. Ontario has the highest unemployment rate of the rest at 7.6%. So, look, that's the job market, and we clearly covered housing in the previous section. As for the cost of goods, I don't have stats for it. If you can tell me how much a Snickers bar costs in Ontario versus that of Quebec and Yukon, I'm all ears. But now, I'd like to share a story that I referenced in late 2025 with respect to the exodus of people from Ontario, specifically young people. This is the report by the Fraser Institute. Now, I don't know about you, but I tend to place the Fraser Institute higher on the credibility level than a lot of other sources of economic data. August 2nd, 2025 is the date. You can Google it, Fraser Institute. It's called Exodus of Young People Suggests Ontario is an Increasingly Less Desirable Place to Live. Now, from the report, it says over the years 2021 to 2024, Ontario saw 104,000 people on net leave the province and migrate somewhere else in Canada. This concerning trend of outmigration, particularly among working-age individuals, suggests the province is an increasingly less desirable place to live and work, and policymakers should take notice. They say these are concerning trends. More individuals have been leaving Ontario than are coming from other provinces, but a significant share of those who are leaving are young adults, those who may be finishing school, starting a career or family, and who have potential to contribute greatly to the overall standard of living in Ontario. It asks, why might Ontario be increasingly viewed as less desirable? It says, first and foremost, Ontario's economy is broken. Provincial living standards have been falling behind the rest of Canada for decades. In 2000, per person GDP was 62,146, nearly 5% higher than the rest of Canada. Yet growth in Ontario's per person GDP has slowed since then, and provincial living standards in 2023 were 3.2% lower. than the rest of Canada. Now, Ontarians are further saddled with some of the highest tax rates in North America. For example, an Ontarian earning $150,000 per year faces the third highest combined federal and provincial marginal personal income tax rate of anywhere in Canada and the United States. The Ford government's continual debt accumulation, including massive projected deficits of $14.6 billion this year and $7.8 billion next year, suggests taxes in Ontario could rise higher in the years to come. High tax rates take away more of your hard-earned money and discourage skilled workers, including doctors, engineers, and entrepreneurs, from living and working in the province, meaning future tax hikes will only weaken Ontario's already struggling economy. Finally, Ontarians, particularly younger individuals, may leave the province in search of more affordable housing. Ontario is ground zero for Canada's housing affordability crisis. There are few signs this will change anytime soon. Migration numbers suggest Ontario is increasingly becoming a less desirable place to live and work compared to the rest of Canada. And if the government wants to stop the exodus, it has to balance the budget, lower taxes, and meaningfully address housing affordability. Now, in fairness, the same could have been said about Canada as a whole with respect to the budget, deficit, spending, housing affordability, taxes, and just about everything else. But if you recall, it's only been a few years since that campaign that sought to call workers, specifically skilled workers from Ontario to Alberta. And I remember I Googled this recently and I found this ad in the TTC subway and it said, what's the average home price of a detached home? Toronto, 1.4 million. Edmonton, 490,000. Alberta is calling.ca. Now, this didn't stop in 2022 because in 2023, they launched a new campaign targeting skilled workers from Atlantic Canada. So I believe that as we move through 2026, we're going to want to keep an eye on these net migration figures in Ontario. And while the province will undoubtedly benefit, at least numerically, from an influx of immigrants, how many of them stay here is another story. So my prediction on that point is that we are going to see an increase, a very large increase in the negative net migration, an increased negative, you get what I'm saying, as we move through 2026. So folks, those are the 6 topics that were on my mind. Within each of those, as I said, I wanted to discuss, I wanted to opine. It's necessarily about predictions for me. It's really about identifying the things that you have to keep an eye on. So we can talk about real estate prices, but as I said, I think it's about market trajectory at this point. Far be it from me to say, whether you're a buyer or a seller, does a 2% difference make the biggest difference to you in the world? Of course, you got a $3 million house, 2%, it's real money. But the point is, and I don't want to sound like a salesman here, I have owned properties since I was 25 years old. I've lived in 3 different places. And I can look back and say that I, could have made more doing this or could have made less. But at the end of the day, what I remember are the years that I spent in there. Real estate itself is an investment, but it's not a share of stock. You're only buying that share of stock to profit from it. We have to remember that you buy real estate to live in. So if you're a buyer saying, I don't know, I think the market might drop another 2% by the end of 2026. I mean, I don't know, what's 2% of $1 million house? What about living there for a year that you'll always remember? Certainly that's what I can speak to at 45 years old now, having carved out so many incredible years of life in my various neighborhoods and condos and houses. So point is, not to sound salesy, but I think plus or minus 2%, it's negligible. It doesn't really matter, but people still want to understand the market trajectory. There's so much confusion about what's happening in the market. I believe, as I wrote on my blog last week, that part of the reason we saw the record low sales was paralysis. It was people just not wanting to make a move. It's sort of like, well, I can't lose if I don't try, right? I can't make a mistake if I don't make a decision. And I think that was responsible for the record low number of sales. So the pre-construction market, it's dead. It doesn't mean we're not going to report on it, but that's going to be something that you're going to hear about a lot this year. And remember, as I said, if you take anything away from this, other than the fact that I was right, if you take anything away from this, it is that you have to distinguish between pre-construction and resale. You have to remember that number that I gave you, 14.7%. That is how much on paper the average condo price declined from February of 2022 through the data in November of 2025 versus 25.5% comparatively for detached. So when I say the condo market decline is overblown, I'm not lying, you have the data. And then you've got to look at what's happening across Canada because not everyone has to live in Ontario. I don't want to speak at a school, but I had a call from a client last night and, splitting up with a partner and said, well, what's next for you after you sell the house? And this individual said, I might move to France. Cool. That's awesome. That's That's cool. Not everyone is locked to Toronto. Not everyone is locked to Ontario. I mean, I am. Toronto Realty blog, Toronto Realty Group. And I did sign a lifetime agreement with the devil, so there's that as well. But the point is, not everyone has to live here, and you're going to see a lot of conversations about affordability across Canada. As I said, I think that the rest of the province is going to catch up, but it's still going to provide opportunity for folks to live. And last but not least, we talked about net migration, which I think you're going to want to keep an eye on. So folks, I believe I am approaching 1 hour. If you've made it this long, congratulations, but what does your boss think? No, I'm kidding. Congratulations on the 1 hour on the Stairmaster, wherever you're watching or listening to this. So folks, thanks so much for viewing this The Last Honest Realtor, the very first podcast of 2026. If you'd like to leave me a comment, please go ahead and do so in the YouTube comments section. Do my best to read those and sometimes reply. Please remember to like, comment, or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you here next time on The Last Honest Realtor.